Andrew's perspective. If I had to choose a single word with which to describe the escorts awaiting us outside, it'd be thorough. Before the three of us even overstepped the compound's threshold, we were greeted by a small battalion of decorated guards. Vavi visibly shriveled away as one of them approached her, and through some mechanism of instinct, I found myself stepping forth to back her up.
Tell it to wear this.
The guard demanded, thrusting into Vavi claws a bundle of black cloth and gesturing toward me with a flippant flap of the arm. Mildly uncomfortable as I was to be called an it, I nevertheless complied when Vavi gently placed the outfit in my arms.
Could you please put these on?
She asked, her gentle and soothing voice in stark contrast with that of the soldier glaring me down. The outfit provided resembled to some degree a plague doctor's garb, with a flowy black robe concealing my features. The main difference, however, was in its mask. Unlike the more avian visage of a medieval medic, the leather covering provided looked more like a muzzle meant to silence Kaffel criminals by forcing their snout shut beneath its tight mold. Obviously, this was no problem for someone with a more human facial plan. And so I concluded that this mask was more meant to conceal my alien nature than anything else. My theory was seemingly confirmed when I put on the mask only to find a web of stiff foam holding up the snout. Clearly, this mask was either modified or created just for me. Immediately upon my equipping of the mask, a cordon of soldiers surrounded my companions and I, forming a protective barrier as they herded us outside toward our vehicular escort, which, save for its utter lack of side windows, largely resembled a limousine. Road trip, I exclaimed jokingly, tucking myself into the furthest back seat and gesturing for Vavi to join me there.
I see my request for air transport was denied.
Chot sighed, taking a seat near the front so as to better speak with the driver.
Did Salkim provide any explanation as to why?
Sir, it was too conspicuous, sir.
Replied the ferryman, seemingly satisfying the head diplomat with his professional demeanor.
The journey from here to the prototype lab is 7 segments. After that, Goldnest is only a day or so away.
Sounds like we'll be in here a while. I shrugged, leaning back and placing my hands behind my head as I looked up pensively toward the vehicle's gray ceiling.
Good news is they've got magazines in here.
Vavi, quick to try and cheer me up, was the next Kaffel among us to speak.
This one's about you.
She continued gleefully, holding up a booklet with the title Aliens on Archesa. Amusing as I found the title itself, I was by this point rather disinterested in reading more about my own arrival. Ultimately, I resolved to leaf through it later, focusing instead on other distractions for the moment. Does this thing have a radio? I asked one of the soldiers seated across from us.
It should...
They replied, glancing toward the driver for confirmation.
Music?
The chauffeur asked, reaching for a small box embedded into the vehicle's dashboard and pressing a few buttons to conjure from it a tirade of Zintrish song. Up until this point, I wasn't aware that chirps and coos could rhyme, yet clearly whoever sung this song had managed it. Beautiful as the music itself was, hearing my earpiece's attempts to translate at the same time was already giving me a headache seconds in. Naturally, I didn't want to just take it off, as that would limit my ability to communicate. But without music in my own language, my options were somewhat limited to either that of a trip laden with awkward silence. Then I got an idea. Cleo? I began, pressing a button on my earpiece meant to signal the AI.
Yes?
The smooth voice replied with a questioning lilt, something her original programmers likely worked hard to add in. My Kaffel co-passengers looked at me with confusion as I continued into my earpiece, speaking with the virtual entity fortunately still linked to my ship's computer. Are you able to access my playlist? I asked, noting well the curiosity seeping into Vavi's posture as she listened in on my conversation.
Who's he talking to?
One of the soldiers asked, visibly uneasy with my correspondence.
He's talking to the artificial intelligence on his ship's computer. It's what allows him to understand our speech.
Technically, I am what is known as a VI.
Cleo interjected through the small speaker on my earpiece's far side.
My sapience score is approximately 0.86. For reference, humans like Andrew usually range from 1.00 to 1.22. I am not truly self aware per se, but I am able to replicate sapience with an 86% accuracy.
What she said. I chuckled awkwardly to the now dumbfounded soldiers, all of whom looked a mixture of curious and terrified by the implications of a computer replicating a person, an innocence I actually quite missed within myself. Once again, Vavi the ever-curious was next to reply.
Miss Cleo, you said something about a sapience score?
She began curiously, producing her notepad and placing a pen idly upon it in preparation to jot down information.
Could you explain what that means?
Of course, Miss Vavi. The Intelligence Sapience Index, or ISI, is a way of measuring how close to true sapience an artificial intelligence is. Andrew's interactions with your species place them at an average of 1.13 on this scale. The highest ISI score ever achieved was ironically a SETI search program meant to sift through radio signals in search of extraterrestrial intelligence. This miraculous score of 1.79 was so intense that this AI, colloquially referenced as Curiosity in honor of a planet exploring rover, actually showed signs of existential dread and even depression in the months prior to its unexplained shutdown.
Cleo? I interjected awkwardly, repeating my initial question to the VI regarding whether or not it could potentially pull up my musical selection.
Yes, Andrew, I am able to access your playlist. Why do you ask?
Excuse me for a moment. Briefly, taking my finger off the signaling button, I gestured for one of the soldiers to get our driver's attention. Stopping at a purple light, the chauffeur turned around for a moment to face me.
Need something, Mr. Alien, sir?
Would you mind putting the radio on an unused frequency for me? I asked, prompting our driver to spin the radio's dial over until its nausea-inducing music faded into mere white noise static. Excellent. What frequency is that? Pressing down on Cleo's communication button, I waited for a moment as our driver listed out the unused frequency before then continuing my inquiry. Could you please broadcast my playlist on that frequency?
Of course.
The VI chimed, taking advantage of my ship's broadcasting equipment to complete my request. Almost instantaneously, the radio's white noise faded away and was replaced by a tune, the familiarity of which heavily juxtaposed my current surroundings. Ever since I graduated from middle school, my favorite songs usually involved space to some degree. The void between stars fascinated me to no end, and frequently on clearer nights, I would look up at the night sky and marvel at the vastness to which my eyes were privy. Thinking back to those days as I sat inside an alien transport on the way to meet their prime minister, admittedly made me chuckle a bit. Feels like a lifetime ago. Probably because it was. Vavi and the soldiers accompanying us, meanwhile, bore a variety of reactions. Much as I loved her inquisitive mind, it was nice to see my CAFL friend putting down her notepad for once as she listened with rapture to the tunes of 20th century legend David Bowie, by far the most classical piece within my selection. The soldiers' reactions ranged from suspicious to bewildered to awestruck.
I didn't understand any of the lyrics.
One guard began, tapping his claws against the side of his seat in rhythm with the song's dying fade.
But your people have some pretty beautiful music.
That was amazing.
Vavi sobbed joyously, wiping tears of joy from her face, before then finally turning away from the radio to look me in my eyes.
Human music is so full of emotion. I've never heard a song sung with such vibrancy before.
Music has always been a big part of human culture. I explained, appreciating the other passengers' approval regarding my particular selection. We've actually discovered human musical instruments over 50,000 years old. Judging by the Kafel's reaction to such a number, it was clear to me their species held no comparable contemporary to such an artifact.
Fascinating.
Chot hummed, shaking his head ponderously as he contemplated the staggering figure.
Our oldest instrument, the Indarian drum, barely dates back 20,000 of your years, though I'd imagine we've been singing for much longer.
Our journey continued for many hours more, all the while bathed the splendor of music centuries old. Throughout the trip, Vavi continued in her usual inquisitive reverie, probing my mind with questions regarding human history and culture, all of which I was happy to provide answers to. One of her questions was that regarding our major world wars. The documentary we watched had gone into the more military aspects, but the political and social sectors had remained largely ambiguous throughout the warfare presentation. Needless to say, I spent nearly an entire segment expounding upon this subject.
Your people are so complex.
She chirped, passing me a bottle of water as I stopped to catch my breath. If by that you mean out of our fucking minds, then I concur. I chuckled in reply, gulping down the liquid lifeblood thankfully common in necessity to all organic creatures. As I did so, the music shifted once again to a song by my favorite contemporary band, the 22nd century phenomena Moonrock Red. I'll admit, hearing these songs of my old playlist and basking in the memories they conjured did stir up within me a sense of homesickness. Statistics dictated that I would very likely never see my planet again outside of a screen, and even if I did, it'd probably be ever more alien than this one after so long spent aimlessly adrift in space. Once this war was over, however, perhaps I could finally get started in seeing Archesa as my new home.
Thank you for watching. Like, share and subscribe for more original content. New chapters and standalone stories uploaded weekly.